I am joined today by Caroline Rush, Chief Executive of the British Fashion Council, and Sophia Kianni, founder of Climate Cardinals and a member of the United Nations Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. And we're here to discuss the role of fashion and climate on the road to COP26. Thank you both so much for taking the time to join.
Pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Super excited to be here.
Thank you. This November, the UK will be hosting the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties, also known as COP26, where parties will unite to accelerate action towards the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Welcome, Sophia. Now, can you please elaborate on the relationship between the fashion industry and COP26?
Well, I think that leading up to COP26, hopefully we're going to have an in-person COP, and it'll be a very pivotal moment for world leaders to convene and for leaders within the fashion industry to also convene and reflect upon their actions and see that in wake of COVID-19, how we can innovate and see. We've seen that the fast fashion industry was completely upended by COVID, primarily because the way that these systems operate is just entirely unsustainable. That's why millions of dollars worth of clothing went unfulfilled. And I think it'll just be great to see during COP how people come together and talk about what we can do moving forward.
Thank you. Now, Caroline, in your experience, what are the most pressing sustainability issues that need to be addressed within the fashion industry so it can reduce its impact on climate crisis?
Well, the big challenge is that there are so many, and certainly the businesses that we talk to, we've been really thinking about how, first of all, we focus on what they can do now. You know, how they can switch to green energy, how they can think about sustainable design, how they think about responsible waste, how they think about sort of the whole logistics system. But there are big issues in terms of challenges in the supply chain that need the whole industry, not just the designers and the retailers, but the manufacturers and producers and agriculture to come together, to collaborate, you know, to really make sure that there's no duplication, to look at that whole ecosystem. And certainly that's one of the things that we're trying to do from a circular fashion perspective, is look at the ecosystem that is required for the fashion industry to move to circularity. And we're seeing great things, but there's some big infrastructure challenges that need to be addressed. And of course, the way that business is done needs to be addressed as well.
Thank you. Sophia, anything to add?
Well, I mean, I think that just from what I've seen with my experience at the UN, I think that the UN Fashion Charter for Climate Action has provided a great starting point for these like major stakeholders to pledge to be carbon neutral by 2050. And so I would love to see other businesses signing on to that and also making pledges more aggressive. So instead of the 2050 benchmark, which many climate scientists say is a little too late, maybe moving that needle back to 2040, 2030.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, Caroline, you are doing incredible work leading absolutely trailblazing initiatives. Can you share with us, what is the British Fashion Council doing to better prepare the fashion industry to reduce its impact on the environment and better align itself with the objectives of COP26?
Absolutely. I mean, I think just to echo what Sophia was saying is that there's a definite call to action. And I think one of the things that we're really using this opportunity of COP26 about is to get businesses that maybe haven't signed on to the Fashion Charter to do so, to align with the race to zero and to really start to pledge their action. You know, we really see this as the first year of a decade of change. If we don't create the change now, we haven't got a chance of reaching the targets in the Paris Agreement. So action now is essential. Our largest commitment, as you know, was the creation of the Institute of Positive Fashion, which for us brings together thought leaders, global programs, as well as young designers and innovators to share their knowledge. So we've already convened the industry, academia and government around our circular fashion ecosystem research project that's underway. So we'll have the results of that in September, which we're looking forward to sharing. And that we hope will lead us to really articulate well, and we know, of course, what some of the barriers are towards moving towards that, but really to think about how industry and government can work together and make bold steps to create change.
I love hearing this because it's not the usual collaboration, industry and government. And we're now at a point where it's critical and pivotal to drive the change that we need to see. Sophia, a primary goal of COP26 is to secure global net zero emissions by mid-century. But to do this, countries are being asked to come forward with very ambitious 2030 emission reduction targets. Recognizing the significant carbon footprint of the fashion industry, what actions would you like to see from major stakeholders in support of this mission, expanding on what you had shared earlier?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret the fashion industry emits more carbon waste than international flights, maritime shipping. And so I do think that these stakeholders have a large responsibility to reevaluate their supply systems and to see where there's room for them to cut their emissions and to invest in more sustainable equipment. And then in addition to that, I think also maybe changing even their business models instead of just mass producing clothing, a lot of which just ends up in landfills. They can actually fulfill orders based on demand, or they can create smaller capsule collections and invest in creating clothing that isn't just supposed to be used one time and then thrown away. I know there have been like several studies that showed that over like $2 million were like spent on clothing that was only used once in the UK. And so I definitely think that just reevaluating the way that they're producing clothing and also the way that they're marketing clothing to consumers would be a great step forward.
Thank you. And I want to ask you both, especially for the audience who might not be familiar. Caroline, you had mentioned the race to zero. Can you share a little brief on what that is, please?
Well, as Sophia was saying, is that really it's this pledge for businesses to get to net zero emissions. And of course is that there's a pledge for 2050, but there's a real push to look at what targets can be reached by 2030 and to get significant commitments around that. So, for instance, one of the things that we're committing to do is to reduce by 50% with a view over the next decade, with a view to getting to net zero by the time we get to 2040, is that it's great to see businesses being able to make these these quite tough pledges, but what we want to see is transparency around how they're achieving that. But equally as important is the transparency around the challenges in being able to do that, so that again the industry can collaborate to try and overcome some of those challenges, and where necessary government can play the role of incentives to really incentivize the best kind of business behaviors to get there.
Thank you. Now, I have a question. I'd actually like both of your insights, but Caroline, I'll start with you. Now, COP26 underscores the importance of innovative partnerships across government, business, and civil society in order to reduce our harmful environmental impact. But what partnerships would you like to see emerge out of 2021?
Well, I think the good news is that we're already starting to see some of these partnerships being formed. So as you said, is that the Fashion Charter is a fantastic example of how businesses around the world are coming together to share their insights, their knowledge, to really address some of these big challenges. From our perspective, of course, in the UK, through the Institute of Positive Fashion, we now have this framework that enables government, industry and academia to collaborate, whether that's to reduce carbon emissions, but also we want to make sure that there's vast improvements of what we call our people pillar to address inequalities in terms of diversity, address issues such as fair labour from factory to head office, so that we're taking that real holistic approach to not just looking at reducing carbon emissions, but looking to move towards a more positive fashion industry for the future.
And Sophia, before I move to you, Caroline, I just want to say I love that you talk about the people pillar, because I think people get quite detached when they talk about the environment, and what they're not realizing, it's so holistic and so connected. So thank you for highlighting that about the people. Sophia, anything to add?
No, I think that Caroline explained it really well. It's just about getting these different groups together, the industry, academia, and having them collaborate, share their insights. You know, I think that too often companies, like when they come up with an idea where they're able to sustainably manufacture something, they might be shy to share it with their competition. But at this point in time, I mean, I think it's so critical for us to all share our innovations and making sure that we're doing all we can so that the fashion industry becomes greener and cleaner.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And to that point, I love to emphasize here that an industry that was built and always known for competition now is starting to thrive and come together based on collaboration. So thank you for highlighting that. Now, both, are there any barriers to achieving the progress we speak about today? We know we're seeing progress. We know that there's issues, but there's still so much work to be done. Sophia?
I honestly think that there are a variety of different issues, and I think some of it honestly stems down to education on the part of like sometimes people like me, consumers, young people who tend to think like, oh, it's totally reasonable to buy a tank top for $1, when really like we see that that's completely unsustainable. Those tank tops are being made like oftentimes through really unsustainable means with really sad labor conditions. And so while I do want to see the fashion industry really continue to innovate, I also want to see consumers start to reevaluate the way that they're consuming and realizing that fast fashion is inherently unsustainable and that we need to be investing in fewer pieces that are meant to last a long time.
Caroline?
I think there are quite a few barriers. Doesn't mean to say that they're insurmountable. And the good news is that we know that the industry is willing to come together to try and address those. You know, I absolutely agree on the consumer becoming conscious consumers, you know, is making sure that message is loud and clear and understanding the power that we have in consumers in terms of driving business behavior, I think is really exciting. But that idea around innovation, of really adopting innovation, not just in terms of the supply chain and thinking about sort of new business models, but really just looking at new perspectives for the industry to be able to drive forward in a positive sense. I guess finally, I'd say in terms of the barriers is to really think about how the industry works with government. And we see it in our country, but also, you know, I hear from others in other territories, is the fashion industry hasn't necessarily had to have a strong links with government before. There's not necessarily the infrastructure in place within governments to talk about big industrial change strategies. And so one of the things that we're asking of our government is really that they are ambitious, that they work hand in hand with us, because in doing so is that they can drive really great behaviours rather than just thinking about policy or progress in sort of a piecemeal, smaller way.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you both so much for your insight and for your work to constantly strive to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.